Welcome to my video blog from beautiful Riga in the early autumn. Um, in the last few weeks since September, I've been quite busy in researching the sea buckthorn value chains, and I did this in two countries, in eastern Germany and in Latvia. Altogether, I visited nine objects and talked to producers, processors, as well as breeders and scientists. So I started on the 5th of September in Werder, near Berlin, on the 17th Seebuckthorn Festival, German Seebuckthorn Festival, and made some interesting contacts there, which I followed up later. So I went then to see the German Seebuckthorn and Wildberry Association in Altlandsberg, also near Berlin, and following contacts that I had made by email, I then went to Sachsen-Anhalt, that is in Quellendorf, as well as to Mecklenburg, to the city of Ludwigslust. Especially Ludwigslust was an interesting case. The so-called Storchennest or Stork Nest has been producing or has been planting sea buckthorn since 1980 in so-called experimental gardens. So they're the probably oldest standing plantation in Germany we could speak of. Yes, they are, and they were also, until a few years ago, they were the biggest one with 150 hectares. However, as the leader Miss Hinrichs explained to me, in the last 2-3 years, they have a very harsh problem with sudden dying of the plantations. It is not completely clear what is the cause, but it has to do with environmental stress, and that I indeed probably related to climate change. So in the last 3 years, Germany had extremely dry and hot summers, and even though sea buckthorn can grow normally under harsh conditions, this may have been just too much. Especially since places like Ludwigslust, they have been approximating the natural variety, the natural ecology of sea buckthorn. So they have very sandy soils, and apparently sea buckthorn, while they are one of the few who can survive on those soils, it is still a stress factor for them. And sandy soils especially do not keep water, so it is extremely difficult to water them if the ground water level is too low. So the similar problems are seen now in eastern Germany, in a variety of gardens and plantations. Also, the wild stands on the Baltic Sea are suffering, as I learned. From there, I made later trips again to Werder, talking about the family business of the Berger family. I met the scientist who had bred the first East German cultivars in the 70s and until the 2000s. His name is Hans-Joachim Albrecht. He's now 88 years old, and we had a very nice long talk. And then I visited the next day his place of work, where he had been employed for over 30 years until the 1990s, the Spätsche Baumschule, which at that day celebrated its 300th anniversary. It's a famous nursery garden, and also has a very prestigious arboretum that I visited. Since then, I've been back in Latvia, and we went to the Latvian breeders, Andres Bruvelis, who has one of his two nursery gardens in Engure in western Latvia, where he met us, together with my field assistant, Lives Lama. And 2 days later, we also visited his friend and longtime collaborator, Karlis Blooms, and Karlis' son Reinis, who are now in the second generation producing Latvian sea buckthorn in their nursery garden. So Andrei started in 1984, bringing in sea buckthorn from the Moscow Botanical Garden, and in 1987 he shared it with the arboretum where Karlis Blooms was working, at the time in the Kuldiger forests, and the two of them have been collaborating ever since. Andres Bruvelis today is known the as the breeder of two Latvian varieties, um, And yeah, and the perspective of Kalis and Renis was also particularly interesting because they're now living in the in the forestry house next to the arboretum that he'd been building in the 80s, and so we had a very long-term perspective on a locality that he explained basically from the 16th century until today. So much from me. Very interesting research going on, and I'm looking forward to the next weeks where I'm gonna meet more producers and processors in Dorbele in Western Latvia, in Sigulde in Eastern Latvia, and again in Werder in Eastern Germany. Stay tuned.